Behind me is the 2025 Genesis G70 3.3T Sport, and it costs $59,000 USD or $66,000 Canadian. That's the same as the Acura TLX Type-S, a car I thoroughly enjoy driving. I love that car, and perhaps you've already made up your mind between the two, maybe even without driving them, but that's not good enough for me. It's been a few years since I've driven a G70 3.3T, and it's gone through a few updates, but that's not the point of this video. I just want to figure out which is more fun to drive. We're gonna chuck it in Sport Plus. Traction control should be off. It's telling me it's off. That's some good torque. And way too fast. All right, yeah, on paper, the TLX Type-S and the G70 3.3T specifically are very similar. They both have turbocharged V6s. In the TLX, of course, it's a single turbo 3-liter V6 transverse mounted up there, whereas this is a twin turbo 3.3-liter V6. So we have 0.3 liters of displacement more. It really is a game of inches here, and that's where we begin to see it. It's a little bit more displacement. Genesis says 376 pound-feet of torque and 365 horsepower, and that 376 pound-feet of torque is said to come in at 1,300 RPM. That's where peak torque is. Now let's tug on one of these paddles and see how it feels compared to what's actually on the paper. Fourth gear, we'll mat it. No. It doesn't feel like it has torque until 2. And that's kind of what I suspected. It was quick to get off the line though, a little bit of turbo lag, same as the TLX Type-S. Of course, in the TLX, we have slightly less horsepower and a bit less torque, 355 and 354 in that car. Both cars have all-wheel drive. Both cars have transmissions with a ton of gears. This has an 8-speed auto, and the TLX has a 10-speed auto. Both gearboxes are phenomenal. Daily driving, incredibly smooth. One thing I will note, and something I did mention in the TLX video, was that when I was coming up to a stop, even in manual mode, and I tugged the paddle from second to first, it would never give me that first gear downshift, which isn't a big deal, but there was a little bit of a lack of control there. I don't remember being able to hit rev limiter and in that car. So we are in manual and we're in Sport Plus. We'll see. Just go into second. We'll see if it'll kind of just bang off. No, it shifts automatically. Is there another traction mode? Traction and stability control disabled. Okay, there we go. Now, will it let me hit rev limiter? There we go. All right, it gives me a little bit of control. So that's what I was looking for. They both shift very well in most scenarios. They've both given me a couple of weird kind of hiccups, but nothing that's really upset the car. They also both have adaptive suspension. Normal mode feels like, dare I say, sport mode in the TLX. The TLX also has adaptive suspension, but the G70 feels a little bit stiffer here. It's a little bit tighter. Few more vibrations are coming through the steering wheel, the seat here. That's incredibly apparent when you get in the car. And here in Sport Plus, the suspension is very tight, but it's not too stiff to the point where that I wouldn't want to daily drive it. That was on the verge of getting fully sideways there. Really smooth though. G70 is noticeably quicker. Absolutely takes bumps really well too. Steering's good, it weights up a lot in Sport Plus. The steering rack is nice and tight here. It's got variable ratio electric power steering. I mentioned the TLX's engine is transverse mounted. I harped on it in that video, and it's still true, of course. That car doesn't have optimal weight distribution because of that. It has 59% of the weight over the front axle, and this doesn't. This is a longitudinally mounted V6, of course, that lends itself to a rear-wheel drive based all-wheel drive system, a rear biased all-wheel drive system. Now, the TLX Type-S has a smart LSD in the back. It does a real torque vectoring. What that means is, yes, it still is able to send up to 70% of the torque to the rear and up to 100% of that torque to either the left or right wheel. The Genesis G70 does not do that. It has a old school, I guess, mechanical LSD back there, and it does brake-based torque vectoring, so it'll effectively brake the inside wheel when you're coming out of a corner to try and send as much torque as possible to that outer wheel. Now, in most scenarios on the street, are you really going to notice that? Not really. It might come into play in the rain, in the snow, loose surface, or if you're really pushing it either on the street or the track. But that is a huge difference in just kind of the underpinnings of the car.
The upside is the G70 is able to send up to 100% of the torque to the fun wheels versus the Acura's 70%. Pick your poison.
The weight distribution, yeah, the G70 feels a little bit more nimble. It feels a little bit more eager to kind of just change direction and get tossed around. Why is that? So it turns out the G70's wheelbase is about 1.5 inches shorter than the TLX Type-S. So no, the TLX wasn't deceiving you with its wide hips. It is a larger vehicle. That translates into a little bit less cargo space with the G70, actually quite a bit less when it comes to the trunk of the car. Sitting beside myself in the driver's seat, no problem in the G70, but look at me, I'm not a big guy. And the TLX Type-S has about the same amount of rear seat room, basically identical amounts back there. So it really comes down to the capabilities of the trunk, the space in the trunk, and that shorter wheelbase, as we'll get to, yeah, translates into a slightly more dynamic experience if you're just kind of chucking the car side to side on a smaller road. Come to the outside. I love this blue color here with the Genesis. I think the TLX looks better. You guys, please let me know what you think. Genesis has a brand identity now, and it's got some sharp bits. Where it's kind of interesting is this looks like more of a luxury car. The TLX looks way more aggressive. It's got sharper lines. It looks more like a traditional sports sedan, an aggressive sports car that just happens to have 4 doors, right? That's the feeling I get from looking at that car, but it's not quite as sharp tossing it back and forth, and it's not quite as eager to change direction as the G70. It's kind of opposite of what you would think. Not only that, but the G70 weighs 275 pounds less. Yeah, there's no way you're getting all that space, additional cargo space with the TLX without sacrificing a little bit of weight. And both cars have plenty enough torque. Both cars don't have great fuel economy, about 19 to 21 miles per gallon I've been getting in both cars. The TLX is a great high-speed cruiser. Is it precise? Yes. This is in all areas where I could feel it as a driver, about 10% less cushy than the TLX Type-S. Even in comfort mode or eco mode, in the drive mode selector here, the throttle doesn't really get all that lazy. It's still very connected and very responsive to the engine, whereas in the TLX, when you put that thing in comfort mode, it transforms completely into a luxury car. There's more of a gap between luxury and sport. And yeah, the seats are supportive here. I prefer the TLX seats. The TLX seats, while they are both 16-way adjustable, they both have 4-way lumbar support. They're both great as far as holding you in on a back road. The TLX just has that extra comfort to them. Those seats are just a step above. I'm not the biggest fan of the quilted interior here. The G70 has changed a little bit on the interior here. The HVAC controls a little bit more intuitive than the TLX. They updated it, of course, for the 2024 model year with this kind of touch screen, but everything is here all the time, which I love. They've got physical temperature controls. sign of a good car. I can talk and still kind of push the car at the same time. So it's very intuitive. Is it easier to live with as a daily driver? I would say yes, with a couple minor exceptions. The screen here is a 10.25 inch screen. The TLX Type-S obviously got updated to the 12.3. However, unlike the new MDX Type-S, it did not get the axing, the murdering of the touchpad. It still uses the touchpad, and I believe that's the same for the 2025 model year. So as far as that goes, this infotainment, a little bit easier to use. Maps is not as responsive here. The TLX uses built-in Google Maps, which is way better. This is just kind of, it's not unusable by any stretch, but it's just not as intuitive. But everything's kind of closer to me and a little bit easier to use. Although the TLX, the Acura dynamic select button, love that. That's just a nice kind of tactile feeling that the TLX has that this just does not have. And then you do have a dedicated 360 parking cam. Down here, you have your traction control button and your drive mode selector. You don't, however, in the G70, get wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. That stuff is wired. In 2024, it's tough to get into a car that doesn't have wireless phone integration and really praise it for being a stellar 10 out of 10 daily driver. And that's something the TLX has, the Type-S has standard that this does not. So that's a point against it. Steering wheel is awesome here. Not quite as good as the TLX. The TLX steering wheel is, I would say, the best steering wheel in any sedan I've driven in the last 5 years. Like new cars, you know. One thing I love here is the side bolsters in Sport Plus. They have a second setting where they kind of tighten up a little bit when you chuck it in Sport Plus. Gives you a little bit more confidence there. Also has a valve in the exhaust. In addition to that, augmented sounds coming through the speakers. I've turned that off. Luckily, Genesis gives you the option to turn that off. That's gone. No, thank you. It sounds good for a V6. It doesn't have the TLX cold start though. Again, a game of inches. The TLX cold start, awesome for a V6. It has a bit of a growl. The G70 doesn't really have much of an amazing sound. Yeah, you sacrifice a little bit of comfort and convenience for a tighter, smaller package. And that's really the gist of it. These are two cars for a very similar buyer, but you just kind of look around at your landscape, where you live, the kinds of roads you drive, how often you're going to hit the back roads, how often you're really going to push the car. Do you drive in the snow? Are you going to be going on long road trips? Those are the questions you should really be asking yourself. So what would I do? Which car am I going to buy? So which am I going to buy? Well, in reality, I'm probably not going to buy either of these. I'll stick with my 30-year-old Nissans, but the G70 is a great contender. It does enough different to where making this video, I feel, is an obvious thing to do. Now, they both have basically the same power. They both get not so great fuel economy and all those other things. So it really comes down to the details. Like I was mentioning, what are you going to use the cars for? If I were to pick a daily driver, just every day, the G70 is just a little bit more intuitive to live with, despite the fact it doesn't have wireless Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. That's a huge miss, but everything else is just a little bit easier to use on a daily basis than the TLX. If the TLX were to update their trackpad in the TLX to just the touchscreen, then perhaps that would be the difference. On the flip side of that, if I'm doing longer drives, or if I have another really small car, hatchback or something for a daily, I'd go TLX. It's better to look at. I enjoy walking up to that car a lot more. It gives me more excitement when I get in the car. The steering wheel feels good, just those tactile things on the interior. The seats are better. It's a little bit more comfortable on a long drive. And it has a bit of a GT car feel, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Not to mention the TLX does have a better audio system with that ELS system, just for longer drives. A little bit more comfortable. Let me know what you guys think. It's such a tough choice, but I think I would still go TLX, despite the fact God, the G70 puts up such a good fight. I would love to get this on a track. So yeah, subscribe if you haven't already. Bunch of fun cars that I'm driving coming up. Elantra N, the updated one with the 6-speed manual, as well as the Ioniq 5N. I'll be driving both of those very soon. See you guys next time.